He thought it would be harmless fun, a quick joke to impress his wealthy guests. But what Chef Brandon Hayes didn't realize was that he had just chosen the worst possible person to humiliate in his own kitchen. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that appearances can be dangerously misleading. Now, back to Emily Carter. The restaurant shimmered under soft amber lighting, the kind that made every glass of wine glow and every polished surface reflect quiet luxury. It was one of those exclusive places where reservations were booked months in advance, where a single dish could cost more than a week's paycheck, and where reputation meant everything. Guests in tailored suits and elegant dresses filled the room, their conversations blending into a low, confident hum. And then there was Emily, standing near the edge of the dining area, almost blending into the background. She looked like she didn't belong there at all. Her sweater was simple, her jeans unremarkable, her presence quiet to the point of invisibility. Most people didn't even notice her. Those who did gave her the same quick glance, the kind that judges without thinking, and then looked away just as fast. She didn't react. She never did. Emily had learned long ago that silence often revealed more about others than words ever could. Across the room, Chef Brandon Hayes moved like he owned not just the kitchen, but the entire space. His crisp white jacket, embroidered with his name, gleamed under the lights, and his posture carried the confidence of a man who had built his reputation on precision and control. Guests admired him. Staff feared him. And tonight, with a table of high-profile investors seated front and center, Brandon was determined to deliver more than just food. He wanted a show. His eyes swept the room, searching for something, anything, that could add a spark of entertainment to the evening. That was when they landed on Emily. He paused for just a second, studying her with a faint smirk forming at the corner of his lips. To him, she was the perfect contrast to everything this place represented. Simple, out of place, an easy target. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the soft murmur of the dining room with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, drawing attention with the confidence of a performer who knew exactly how to control a room. "How about a little entertainment before your next course?" Conversations faded. Heads turned. The energy shifted. Brandon gestured toward Emily, as if presenting a curiosity. "We have a guest here who looks like she might enjoy trying her hand in a real kitchen." A few guests chuckled, unsure at first, but encouraged by his tone. Emily felt the eyes turn toward her, one by one, like spotlights switching on. "Why don't we see what she can do?" Brandon continued, his smile widening just enough to reveal the edge beneath it. "Just for fun." The phrase hung in the air, light on the surface, but heavy with implication. A joke, a spectacle, a moment designed to entertain at someone else's expense. The staff exchanged glances, some amused, others uneasy. One of the servers hesitated as if about to step in, but thought better of it. No one challenged Brandon Hayes, not in his own restaurant. Emily stood still, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, it seemed like she might decline, like she might quietly step back into the shadows where she had been just moments before. But then something shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible. The way her shoulders straightened, the way her eyes lifted, steady and calm, meeting Brandon's gaze without a trace of hesitation. "What would you like me to make?" she asked, her voice soft but clear enough to cut through the tension that had begun to build. The room reacted with a ripple of surprise. That wasn't the response they expected. Brandon raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Something simple," he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Let's not make it too difficult." A few more laughs followed, louder this time, as if the audience had settled into the idea of what was about to unfold. But Emily didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She simply nodded once, as if accepting a challenge that no one else in the room fully understood. "I'll need 20 minutes, she said. Brandon gestured toward the kitchen with a dramatic flourish. "By all means." And as Emily stepped forward, crossing the invisible line between the dining room and the kitchen, the energy in the room shifted again, though no one could quite explain why. It was still a joke. At least, that's what everyone believed. For now, the moment Emily stepped into the kitchen, the air changed, not for her, but for everyone else who suddenly found themselves watching more closely than they intended. The stainless steel counters gleamed under bright white lights, every surface spotless, every tool arranged with obsessive precision. This was Chef Brandon Hayes' domain, a place where mistakes were not tolerated and where every movement was expected to follow his rhythm. A few line cooks paused mid-task, exchanging quick glances as Emily entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and quiet amusement. One of them leaned toward another and whispered, "This should be interesting," barely suppressing a grin. Near the prep station, a sous chef crossed his arms, clearly entertained by what he assumed would be a short and awkward performance. Brandon followed a few steps behind, maintaining just enough distance to observe without appearing overly invested, though the slight tilt of his head revealed his interest. He expected hesitation, maybe even embarrassment, the kind that would confirm everything he believed about people like her. Emily did not hesitate. She walked calmly to the workstation, her gaze scanning the ingredients laid out before her. Fresh herbs, premium cuts of meat, carefully sourced vegetables, everything selected for perfection. For a brief second, her fingers hovered over the counter, not uncertain, but deliberate, as if she were remembering something rather than figuring it out. Then she began. At first, no one noticed anything unusual. She reached for a knife, lifting it with a steady hand, her grip natural and balanced. A line cook smirked, whispering, "At least she knows how to hold it." But the smirk did not last long. The first cut was clean, precise, almost effortless. Then another, and another. The rhythm built quickly, each motion flowing into the next with a quiet confidence that did not match the image they had formed of her. The whispering slowed. Someone near the stove straightened slightly, watching more carefully now. Emily moved through the kitchen as if she had been there 1,000 times before, her steps measured, her posture relaxed, her focus absolute. She did not rush, but she did not waste a single second. Every action had purpose. Every movement seemed to anticipate the next. Brandon's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. His arms, once loosely crossed, tightened slightly as he watched her work. He told himself it was nothing, just someone with basic kitchen experience trying to appear composed. But then he noticed the details. The way she adjusted the heat without looking. The way she seasoned without measuring, as if instinct guided her hand. The way she plated small components to the side, already thinking several steps ahead. One of the cooks leaned closer to another, his voice lower now, no longer amused. "She is not guessing," he said quietly. "She knows exactly what she is doing." The room did not go silent all at once. It happened gradually, like a slow fade. The casual chatter disappeared first, replaced by focused observation. Even the clatter of utensils seemed to soften, as if the kitchen itself was adjusting to a new presence. Emily remained completely unaware of their shifting attention, or perhaps she simply did not care. Her world had narrowed to the ingredients in front of her, the heat of the stove, the subtle balance of flavors forming in her mind. Outside, in the dining room, guests leaned forward in their seats, watching through the open kitchen window. What had started as light entertainment was becoming something else, something they could not quite name yet. A woman at one of the tables whispered, "Why does this feel different?" No one answered her. Back inside the kitchen, Emily reached for a pan, letting it heat just long enough before adding oil with a controlled motion. The faint sizzle that followed was crisp and immediate, the kind that signaled perfect timing. Brandon's eyes narrowed slightly. That sound was not luck. That was precision. He took a step closer, drawn and despite himself. He began to notice patterns he had not expected to see. Efficiency without haste. Confidence without display. Control without tension. It was the kind of execution that could not be faked, the kind that came from years of repetition and discipline. One of the younger cooks swallowed hard, his earlier grin completely gone. "This is not a joke," he murmured under his breath. No one laughed anymore. The energy in the kitchen had shifted into something heavier, something sharper. The kind of atmosphere that forms when people realize they might have misjudged a situation entirely. And yet, no one spoke it out loud. Not yet. Brandon exhaled slowly, his mind working to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed. He had built his reputation on recognizing talent instantly. And yet, this did not fit into any category he was comfortable with. Emily continued, completely steady, completely focused, as if the weight of their attention did not exist. But the truth was already beginning to surface, not through words, not through explanations, but through something far more undeniable: skill. And in that moment, the kitchen was no longer a stage for a joke. It had become something else entirely, something none of them were prepared for. The longer Emily worked, the more impossible it became to ignore what was unfolding right in front of them. The dish was no longer just a collection of ingredients. It was becoming something intentional, layered, deliberate in a way that spoke of experience far beyond anything they had assumed. The aroma began to shift first, subtle at the beginning, then unmistakable. It was not just the smell of food cooking. It was the kind of scent that carried complexity, something that made people pause mid-conversation without realizing why. In the dining room, forks hovered in midair, glasses stopped halfway to lips, and conversations faded into uncertain silence. Back in the kitchen, one of the senior cooks leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing as he tried to follow her process step by step, but he could not. She was moving too efficiently, skipping the hesitation that most chefs showed when building a dish in real time. She planned this already, he whispered, almost to himself. Brandon heard it, and something about those words unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Planned. That meant intention. That meant control. And control was supposed to be his domain. Emily adjusted the flame again, lowering it just enough to maintain a perfect simmer, then turned to assemble the final elements. Her hands moved with quiet certainty, placing each component with precision that bordered on artistry. There was no excess, no unnecessary flourish, only balance. A young line cook swallowed hard, his earlier confidence completely gone. That plating, that is not casual, he said under his breath. Another nodded slowly, unable to look away. The arrangement on the plate was clean, elegant, and unmistakably refined. It was the kind of presentation that belonged in competitions, not in an impromptu challenge thrown together for amusement. Brandon stepped closer now, no longer pretending to observe. From a distance, his eyes traced every movement, searching for a flaw, a mistake, something he could use to reassert control over the situation. But there was nothing. No hesitation. No correction. No second-guessing. Just execution. And that was when the first crack appeared in his confidence. Outside, a man seated at the front table leaned forward, his brow furrowing as recognition flickered across his face. He had been watching closely for several minutes now, his attention no longer casual, but focused, almost analytical. There is something familiar about that technique, he murmured to the woman beside him. She followed his gaze, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. What do you mean? She asked quietly. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched Emily place the final garnish, his eyes widening slightly as a memory surfaced. Back in the kitchen, the atmosphere had grown so quiet that even the faint hum of the ventilation system seemed louder than before. Emily stepped back just slightly, studying the plate in front of her with a calm, measured expression. For a brief moment, it looked like she might adjust something, but she did not. Instead, she reached for a clean cloth and wiped the edge of the plate with careful precision, removing a nearly invisible trace of sauce that no one else had even noticed. Brandon saw it, and that detail unsettled him more than anything else. That was not something a casual cook would do. That was discipline. That was training. That was habit built over years. He felt something shift inside him, a quiet but undeniable realization beginning to take shape, though he was not ready to accept it fully. Who taught you to do that? He asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. It was the first time he had addressed her directly since she entered the kitchen. Emily did not look up right away. She finished what she was doing, set the cloth down neatly, and only then lifted her gaze to meet his. Her expression remained calm, almost neutral, but there was something behind it now, something steady and unshaken. Experience, she replied simply. The answer was quiet, but it carried weight. It was not defensive. It was not proud. It was just true. Brandon opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. For the first time that night, he did not have control of the moment. In the dining room, the man who had been watching so closely suddenly stood up, his chair sliding back with a soft but noticeable sound against the floor. Several heads turned toward him, but he did not seem to notice. His eyes remained fixed on the plate, on the woman standing behind it, and the realization that had been forming in his mind finally settled into certainty. "No," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "It cannot be." The woman beside him looked up, startled by his reaction. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Emily. "If I am right," he said, his voice now carrying just enough to reach the nearby tables, "then this is not just someone who knows how to cook." Back in the kitchen, Brandon felt the shift ripple through the room, the subtle but undeniable change in energy that comes when truth is about to surface. Emily stood still, composed, her hands resting lightly against the counter, as if she had already reached the end of something long before anyone else had realized it had even begun. And in that moment, the line between assumption and reality was about to be broken in a way none of them could undo. The man took another step forward, his voice no longer uncertain, but edged with recognition that sent a ripple through the room. "I have seen this before," he said, louder now, drawing the attention of every guest within earshot. "That exact technique, the timing, the plating, it is not something you forget." Conversations stopped completely. All eyes turned toward him, then back to Emily, who remained perfectly still behind the counter, her expression calm, almost detached, as if she had already expected this moment to arrive. Brandon felt the shift immediately, the delicate balance of control slipping further from his grasp. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone sharper than before, though there was something beneath it now, something less certain. The man did not look at him. His focus stayed locked on Emily. 3 years ago, he continued, his voice steady, at the National Culinary Championship in Chicago. The final round. There was a chef who executed a dish so precise, so controlled, that the judges stood before the score was even announced. A murmur spread through the dining room. Several guests exchanged glances, the memory triggering recognition in more than just one mind. Brandon's jaw tightened. "That is irrelevant," he said quickly, though his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. But the man shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "it is not irrelevant." He took another step closer, now standing just at the edge of the open kitchen, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if confirming what he already believed. "Because the chef who did that moved exactly like this." The words landed heavily, settling into the silence that followed. Brandon turned back toward Emily, studying her more closely now, really looking for the first time instead of judging. The simplicity of her appearance no longer felt like proof of anything. If anything, it now felt like a question he had failed to ask. "That is a coincidence," he said, though it sounded more like something he needed to believe than something he was certain of. Emily did not respond. She simply reached forward and gently rotated the plate a few degrees, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the counter. The movement was small, almost insignificant, but to the man watching, it was unmistakable. He let out a quiet breath. "No," he said again, softer this time. "That is not a coincidence." A woman at a nearby table leaned forward, her voice hushed but urgent. "Who are you talking about?" she asked. The man hesitated for just a fraction of a second, as if understanding the weight of what he was about to say. Then he spoke, clearly, without hesitation. "Emily Carter." The name moved through the room like a shockwave. Some guests frowned in confusion, while others reacted instantly, their expressions shifting as recognition clicked into place. "The Emily Carter," someone whispered. "The one who won 10 times?" Another voice added, barely above a breath. Brandon froze. For a moment, he did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. The name echoed in his mind, connecting pieces that he had refused to see until now. 10-time champion. National recognition. A reputation built on consistency and excellence. It did not align with the image he had constructed just minutes ago. It could not. And yet, standing right in front of him, calm and unshaken, was the only person who could make it true. He looked at her again. But this time there was no smirk, no dismissal, no superiority. Only realization, slow and unavoidable. "That is not possible," he said quietly, though the words carried none of the certainty they once would have. Emily finally met his gaze fully, her eyes steady, revealing nothing more than quiet composure. "Why not?" she asked. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than any accusation could have. Brandon had no answer. Around them, the room had fallen into complete silence. No laughter, No whispers. Just the weight of recognition settling over every person who had witnessed what they thought was a harmless joke. The staff in the kitchen stood frozen, their earlier amusement replaced by something far more uncomfortable. One of the cooks lowered his eyes, as if suddenly aware of his own assumptions. Another shifted his stance, unable to meet Emily's gaze. Outside, a guest slowly set down his glass, the faint sound echoing in the quiet space. "If that is true," he said carefully, "then this was never a joke to begin with." No one disagreed. Brandon's shoulders stiffened as the full meaning of that statement reached him. He had not created a moment of entertainment. He had created a moment of exposure. And not for her. For himself. Emily rested her hands lightly on the counter, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. She did not defend herself. She did not explain. She did not need to. The truth was already there, undeniable, laid out as clearly as the dish in front of them. And in that moment, the room understood something all at once. The person they had laughed at just minutes ago was never out of place. They were. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the quiet, uncomfortable realization that judgment, once spoken, could not be taken back. Brandon's silence lingered longer than anyone expected, stretching across the room like a weight no one could lift, and for the first time in years, he found himself standing in his own kitchen without a single word that could restore his authority. The polished confidence that once defined him had cracked, not through confrontation, but through something far more unsettling, undeniable truth. He looked at Emily again, but this time there was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet, reluctant recognition of what he had done. Around him, the guests shifted. In their seats, their earlier amusement replaced by a growing discomfort that spread from table to table. A man near the front cleared his throat softly, as if breaking a silence that had become too heavy to hold. "We would like to taste it," he said, his voice measured, respectful in a way that had not existed before. It was not a request for entertainment anymore. It was something closer to acknowledgement. Emily did not react immediately. She simply reached for the plate, lifting it with steady hands, and placed it forward with the same quiet precision she had shown from the very beginning. There was no flourish, no attempt to impress, just a calm completion of what she had started. A server stepped forward, almost cautiously, as if approaching something far more significant than a simple dish, and carried it toward the table. Every movement in the room slowed as the plate arrived. The man who had recognized her earlier leaned in first, his expression focused, almost analytical, as he took in the details up close. The arrangement was flawless, every element balanced, every color intentional, every detail speaking of mastery that did not need to announce itself. He picked up his fork, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then took a bite. The reaction was immediate, though subtle. His posture shifted, his eyes widening slightly as he processed the layers of flavor, the precision, the control. He did not speak right away. He did not need to. The silence said more than any words could. Then, slowly, he set the fork down and looked up. "That is," he began, but stopped, as if searching for a word that did not quite exist. "That is exceptional." The statement carried across the room, quiet but powerful, and it changed everything. Other guests leaned forward, their curiosity now genuine, their expressions no longer amused but intent. Another bite was taken, then another, and with each reaction, the truth became more solid, more undeniable. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was mastery. Brandon stood still, watching it all unfold, each second reinforcing what he could no longer deny. The dish was perfect, not just technically, but in a way that revealed something deeper, something that could not be taught quickly or imitated under pressure. It was the result of years, of discipline, of experience that he had. Dismissed in a single careless moment. He swallowed slowly, his voice finally returning, though it carried none of its usual sharpness. "Why did you not say anything?" he asked, the question quieter than anyone expected. Emily turned her gaze toward him, her expression unchanged, her presence steady in a way that made the entire room feel smaller. "You did not ask," she replied. The simplicity of the answer landed harder than any accusation could have. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, the implications settling in. Assumptions had been made. Judgments had been passed. And not once had anyone thought to question them. Brandon lowered his eyes briefly, a rare gesture that did not go unnoticed. The man who had spoken earlier nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "That is the difference," he said softly. "The people who truly know do not need to announce it." No one argued. No one even tried. The room had already reached its conclusion. Emily wiped her hands lightly on the cloth beside her, the motion calm and unhurried, as if the moment had already passed for her, even though it still held everyone else in place. She stepped back from the counter, her posture relaxed, her role in the scene complete. Brandon watched her, the weight of realization settling fully now, not just about her, but about himself. About the way he had seen her. About the way he had chosen to treat her. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was not filled with tension or anticipation. It was filled with understanding. And in that silence, the lesson did not need to be spoken out loud. It was already clear. The person he had tried to reduce to a moment of entertainment had never needed to prove anything. And the respect he had withheld so easily was something he could not demand back, no matter how much he might want to. Emily turned slightly, preparing to step away, her presence as quiet as it had been when she first arrived. But the room did not forget. Not this time. And as she moved, the only thing that followed her was not laughter, not judgment, but something far rarer. Respect. Emily moved toward the edge of the kitchen, her steps unhurried, her expression unchanged, but the room did not return to what it had been before. Something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how they saw her, but in how they now saw themselves. The guests who had once leaned back in casual amusement now sat forward, their posture attentive, almost reflective. A woman at one of the tables placed her hand lightly against her glass, her voice soft but clear enough to carry. "You have competed before, have you not?" she asked, though the answer was already known. Emily paused, turning slightly, her gaze steady but not seeking attention. "Yes," she said simply. No embellishment. No list of achievements. Just the truth, delivered without weight. The simplicity of it made the reality even more striking. The man who had recognized her earlier gave a small nod, as if confirming what he already believed. Not just competed, he added quietly. Dominated. A few guests exchanged glances, the words settling in with quiet impact. Brandon stood where he was, his mind replaying every moment that had led to this one. Each decision now reframed through a lens he could not ignore. He took a slow step forward, the authority in his posture replaced by something far more measured. 10 championships, he said, almost to himself, as if saying it out loud might help him understand how he had missed it. Emily did not respond immediately. She watched him, not with judgment, but with a calm neutrality that offered no resistance and no comfort at the same time. "Titles do not change the work," she said after a moment. "They only follow it." The words were quiet, but they carried a depth that silenced any remaining attempt to reduce her to a single moment. A young server, who had earlier watched with uncertainty, now stepped closer, her voice tentative but sincere. "Why did you agree to do it?" she asked. "After everything that was said?" It was a question that lingered in the air, shared by more than just one person. Emily considered it briefly, her eyes lowering for just a second, not in hesitation, but in reflection. "Because the work deserves to be done well," she answered. "No matter where you are." The statement settled into the room with a quiet finality. It was not about proving anything. It never had been. That realization made the earlier laughter feel distant, almost misplaced in a way that no one could now justify. Brandon exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, though not disappearing. "I misjudged you," he said, the words direct, stripped of the confidence that once defined him. It was not an excuse. It was not an attempt to recover control. It was simply an acknowledgement. Emily met his gaze, her expression steady, offering neither acceptance nor rejection. "You judged what you saw," she replied. "That is what most people do." There was no accusation in her tone, which made the truth of it even more difficult to ignore. A quiet hush fell again, but this time it carried something different. Not tension, not anticipation, understanding. The man at the table leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "The difference," he said slowly, "is that some people stop at what they see, and others look further." Brandon nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if accepting a lesson he had not expected to learn in his own kitchen. Around them, the staff stood in stillness, each person processing the shift in their own way. The earlier whispers, the quiet jokes, the dismissive glances, all of it now fell out of place, as if it belonged to a different moment entirely. Emily reached for her sweater, adjusting it lightly at the sleeves, the gesture simple, grounding, returning her to the same quiet presence she had carried from the beginning. She did not linger. She did not wait for further acknowledgement. For her, the moment had already concluded the second the work was done. But as she took a step toward the exit, something unexpected happened. One of the guests began to clap. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. Just a single, deliberate sound that broke the silence. Then another followed. And another. Slowly, the room filled with applause, not overwhelming, but genuine, measured, respectful in a way that no words could fully capture. Emily paused for just a fraction of a second, her hand resting lightly at her side, then inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the gesture without drawing attention to it. Brandon watched her, the sound of the applause echoing around him, not as a celebration of spectacle, but as recognition of something far more meaningful. He understood now that what had taken place was not a performance. It was a reminder. And as Emily continued toward the door, the applause followed her only for a moment before fading back into silence. A different kind of silence this time. One that did not demand anything more. One that simply remained, carrying with it a truth that no one in that room would forget. The door had not yet closed behind Emily when the silence inside the restaurant settled into something deeper, something that lingered in the air long after the last note of applause had faded. No one returned to their conversations right away. No one reached for their glasses or their phones. It was as if the entire room had been paused, held in place by a realization that could not be undone. Brandon remained where he stood, his gaze fixed on the space Emily had just left, his thoughts moving slower than usual, heavier, as if each one carried more weight than before. He had spent years building his reputation on precision, on excellence, on the belief that he could read people the same way he read ingredients, quickly, confidently, without hesitation. And yet, in a single moment, that certainty had been proven incomplete. One of the senior cooks shifted beside him, clearing his throat quietly. "Chef," he said, though his voice lacked its usual firmness, "should we continue service?" The question felt almost out of place, like a reminder that the world outside that moment still existed. Brandon blinked once, as if returning from somewhere distant, then gave a small nod. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady but softer than before. "Continue." The kitchen slowly came back to life, but the rhythm had changed. Movements were more deliberate. Conversations were quieter. Even the clatter of pans seemed more restrained, as if the space itself had absorbed the lesson that had just unfolded. In the dining room, guests began to speak again, but their voices carried a different tone now, less casual, more reflective. A man at one table leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. "I have been coming here for years," he said, his voice thoughtful. "And I have never seen anything like that." Across from him, a woman nodded, her eyes still fixed on the kitchen. "It was not just the food," she said. "It was the way she carried herself. Like she did not need anyone to believe her." The words hung in the air, simple but powerful, echoing a truth that everyone in the room had felt but had not yet put into words. Brandon turned slightly, his gaze moving across the dining room, taking in the faces that only minutes ago had been entertained by what they thought was a harmless joke. Now, those same faces reflected something else entirely. Respect. Not loud, not exaggerated, just real. He walked slowly toward the edge of the kitchen, stopping where Emily had stood earlier, his hand resting lightly on the counter. For a brief moment, he looked down at the space where the plate had been, as if expecting to find something left behind. But there was nothing. No trace. No sign. Just a clean surface, as precise and composed as she had been. One of the younger cooks approached carefully, his earlier confidence replaced by hesitation. "Chef," he said, "was she really?" He did not finish the question, but he did not need to. Brandon nodded once, his expression calm, though his eyes carried a depth that had not been there before. "Yes," he said quietly. "She was." The cook exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping slightly as the full weight of the realization settled in. "We laughed," he murmured, almost to himself. Brandon did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked back toward the door, His voice measured when he finally spoke. "We assumed," he said. "That is worse." The distinction was subtle, but it carried a sharper edge, one that cut deeper because it was true. Around them, the staff continued their work, but the energy had shifted into something more aware, more intentional. Each person moved with a quiet understanding that what had happened was not just a moment, but a reflection. In the dining room, the man who had first recognized Emily leaned forward again, speaking to those at his table. "There is a reason people like her win," he said. "It is not just skill. It is discipline. It is humility. It is the ability to do the work the same way, whether anyone is watching or not." His words carried softly, but they reached further than he intended, settling into the space like a final piece of something that had already been understood. Brandon heard them, and this time, he did not resist. He let the meaning settle, not as a challenge, but as a quiet truth he could not deny. He straightened slightly, his posture returning, but not in the same way as before. There was no arrogance in it now, no need to assert control. Only a quiet resolve, something steadier, something earned. The service continued. Plates moved. Orders were called. Guests resumed their meals. But nothing felt exactly the same. And as the evening carried on, one thing remained, not spoken, not displayed, but present in every glance, every movement, every quiet pause. The understanding that respect is not something you offer based on what you think you see. It is something you learn to give before you are proven wrong. And in that restaurant, on that night, that lesson stayed long after Emily Carter was gone. The night moved forward, but something from earlier refused to fade, lingering in the subtle pauses between conversations and in the quiet glances exchanged across tables. It was no longer just another evening of fine dining. It had become a story, one that was already being retold in hushed tones from one table to another. At the center table, the man who had recognized Emily leaned back slightly, his fingers resting against the edge of his glass as he spoke, his voice calm but certain. "People think excellence announces itself," he said. "They expect it to be loud, obvious, impossible to miss. But the truth is, the highest level of mastery often looks simple." Across from him, a younger guest nodded slowly, still processing. "That is what made it so easy to overlook," she admitted. She did not try to stand out. The man gave a small, knowing smile. She did not need to. In the kitchen, Brandon stood near the pass, watching as plates moved out one after another, each dish prepared with the same level of precision he had always demanded. But tonight, something felt different. Not in the execution, but in the awareness behind it. His eyes traced every movement more carefully now, not just looking for errors, but observing the intent behind each action. He noticed the small things he had once taken for granted. The way a cook adjusted seasoning without measuring. The way another aligned a garnish instinctively. Skills that, until tonight, he had seen as routine now carried new meaning. Because he had just witnessed what those same fundamentals looked like at their absolute peak. A sous chef approached him quietly, holding a finished plate for approval. "Chef," he said, waiting. Brandon looked down at it, studying the arrangement, the balance, the detail. It was excellent. It always had been. But now, there was a new question forming in his mind, one that had not existed before. Not just whether it was correct, but whether it was intentional in the same way. He gave a small nod. "Send it," he said, his voice calm. The sous chef hesitated for a moment, then added softly, "Do you think she will come back?" Brandon did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted briefly toward the door again, as if expecting it to open, as if part of him still believed the moment was not entirely over. "No," he said finally. "People like her do not return for validation." The words were not bitter. They were simply true. In the dining room, the conversation continued to evolve. The initial surprise had settled into something more reflective, more thoughtful. A woman at a nearby table spoke quietly to her companion. "I almost laughed," she admitted, when he called her forward. "I thought it was harmless." Her companion shook his head slightly. "It never is," he said. "Not when someone is being reduced to a moment." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It is strange," she added, "how quickly a room can turn." He gave a small, knowing glance toward the kitchen. "It did not turn," he said. "It was corrected." The distinction was subtle, but it resonated. Around them, guests continued their meals, but the tone remained different, more aware, more intentional. Even the staff moved with a heightened sense of presence, as if each action now carried more meaning than before. Back in the kitchen, Brandon adjusted his jacket slightly, smoothing the fabric with a slow, deliberate motion. It was something he had done countless times before, but tonight it felt different. Less about presentation, more about composure. He stepped forward, taking his place at the center of the kitchen once again, but not as the same man who had stood there earlier. There was no need to reclaim authority. It had already shifted into something quieter, something earned through acknowledgement rather than control. One of the cooks glanced at him, then quickly returned to his station, his posture more focused than before. The lesson had not been spoken out loud, but it had been understood. An understanding, once reached, has a way of staying. The final courses of the evening began to move out, each plate carrying not just flavor, but the weight of a moment that had reshaped the room. Guests tasted more carefully, staff worked more deliberately, and Brandon watched it all with a perspective that had changed in a way he could not reverse. Because once you see something clearly, truly clearly, you cannot return to the way you saw it before. And somewhere beyond the walls of that restaurant, Emily Carter continued her evening as she always had, without announcement, without expectation, unchanged by the moment that had transformed everyone else. Inside, however, the impact remained. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. A quiet shift in awareness that would shape every decision, every judgment, every glance that followed. And in that space, long after the last plate had been served, the lesson remained, not as a memory, but as something far more lasting. Something that would surface again, the next time someone was tempted to judge too quickly. Because now, they knew exactly what that mistake could cost. The final guests began to leave, their footsteps softer than when they had arrived, their conversations quieter, as if each person carried something with them that could not be easily explained. The restaurant, once filled with the confident rhythm of routine, now settled into a slower, more reflective pace. Tables were cleared, glasses were collected, the lights dimmed slightly as the evening drew to a close. But the atmosphere remained changed, shaped by something that no one had planned and no one could undo. Brandon stood alone for a moment near the center of the dining room, his hands resting lightly at his sides, his gaze moving across the space that had once felt entirely under his control. It still looked the same. The polished floors, the carefully arranged tables, the soft glow of the lighting. Nothing visible had changed. And yet, everything felt different. He walked slowly toward the front window, pausing as he looked out into the quiet street beyond. For a brief moment, he wondered where she had gone, not out of curiosity, but out of something closer to respect. Not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that forms when someone reveals a truth you did not know you needed to learn. Behind him, the last of the staff moved quietly, finishing their work with a focus that felt more intentional than before. No one rushed. No one complained. The earlier energy, the casual ease, had been replaced by something steadier, something more aware. One of the cooks approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "Chef," he said, his voice low, "we are closing up." Brandon nodded once, acknowledging without turning. "Thank you," he replied. The cook hesitated, then added, "Tonight was different." Brandon allowed himself a small pause before answering. "Yes," he said simply. The word carried more meaning than it appeared to. The cook gave a slight nod and stepped away, leaving Brandon alone again with his thoughts. He turned back toward the room, his eyes tracing the same path they had earlier, but now with a different perspective. He could still see it, the moment when the laughter had faded, when the room had gone quiet, when the truth had revealed itself not through words, but through undeniable skill. He understood now that it had not been a performance. It had been a mirror, and what it reflected was not her, but them. A quiet realization settled in, one that did not demand attention but refused to leave. Respect is not something that should be earned through proof. It is something that should be given before judgment is made. And when it is withheld, the cost is not just embarrassment. It is understanding lost too late. Brandon exhaled slowly, straightening his posture, not to reclaim authority, but to carry something new forward. Something quieter. Something more grounded. He walked back toward the kitchen, stopping briefly at the counter where it had all happened. His hand rested lightly against the surface, the same place where she had stood, where everything had shifted. There was no trace of the moment left. No sign that anything extraordinary had occurred. Just a clean, empty space. But he knew better now. Because some moments do not leave marks you can see. They leave something far more lasting. As the final lights dimmed and the doors were locked, the restaurant fell into stillness. Not the kind that signals an ending, but the kind that holds something within it, waiting to surface again when it is needed. Outside, the night moved on as it always does, unchanged, unaware of what had taken place within those walls. But inside, the lesson remained, carried quietly by everyone who had witnessed it. Not as a story to impress, not as a moment to repeat, but as a truth to remember. That the person you overlook might be the one who changes everything. And that respect, once denied, does not return the same way it was lost. And in that quiet, as the last light faded, the room seemed to hold onto one final thought. Simple, steady, and impossible to ignore. The world does not always announce greatness. Sometimes, it walks in quietly, waits to be underestimated, and then leaves without ever needing to prove anything at all.